The restaurant district shut itself down the way expensive places do, not all at once, but in layers, the valets going first, then the hostesses, then the kitchen lights dying one by one behind frosted glass until only the candles at the last occupied tables remained. Marcus Hale walked this block on his way to the parking garage most Thursdays, because Thursday was his late work night and the parking garage on Clement was cheaper than the one closer to the building he was currently auditing. It was 11:14 p.m. He was carrying his inspection bag, a thermos that had been empty since 9, and the kind of tiredness that lives specifically in the lower back and behind the eyes. He almost stepped over it. The wallet was black leather, the kind of black that has a particular depth to it, not dyed but treated, the product of craft rather than process. It was lying half against the base of a planter box outside what had been, until 30 minutes ago, a restaurant where a main course cost as much as Marcus's weekly grocery budget. It was open, splayed on the pavement, which was why it had not been stepped on. People navigated around open things on pavement without looking at them directly. Marcus stopped. He looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you've noticed but haven't yet decided to act on. Then he looked up and down the block. A couple 200 feet away were walking away from him, not looking back. A cab was moving in the opposite direction. The sidewalk was otherwise empty. He crouched and picked it up. The first thing he noticed was the weight. Not just cash weight, the weight of a wallet that carried its owner's full life, cards, receipts, the accumulated material of a person who kept everything organized and close. He checked the card slots without removing anything, because the right way to return a lost wallet was to identify the owner and do nothing else. The ID was in the second slot, behind a matte black card that had no logo on its face. Victoria Vaughn. The photograph showed a woman in her mid-40s with the specific, composed expression of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by cameras. The address was a building he recognized, a glass tower in the financial district, one of 3 Vaughn developments had constructed in the last 8 years. He opened the main compartment. He did not need to count it. He could see enough to know the denomination and enough denominations to understand the approximate total. The kind of money that sits in a wallet only when it has been assembled for a specific purpose, not carried casually. He estimated 40,000. He would later count exactly 4,250, but that was later. The documents were behind the cash. Not many, 4 pages, folded to wallet size, bearing the Vaughn Developments letterhead and the kind of header language that appears on internal acquisition documents. Project names in code, figures in columns, signatures at the bottom. He looked at them for 2 seconds. He folded them back exactly as they had been, and closed the wallet. He was standing in the field of the surveillance camera mounted above the restaurant's entrance. He had noticed it when he crouched, because he noticed cameras the way structural engineers notice load-bearing walls, automatically, as a matter of professional habit applied to the world. The camera had a clear line on him from the moment he stopped walking. He didn't mind this. He put the wallet in the front pocket of his inspection bag, zipped it closed, and continued walking to the garage. In the car, before he started the engine, he looked up the number for Vaughn Development's main office. He noted their operating hours. He drove home. The kitchen light was on because he always left it on when he worked late, a practice that had started as a way of making the house feel less empty when Emma was asleep and had become simply the way things were. The rest of the house was dark. The kitchen glowed through the front window from the street. He hung his coat on the hook inside the door, set his inspection bag on the floor beside it, and stood for a moment in the entry the way he stood every night when he came home late, recalibrating from the outside to the inside, the work to the home, the professional attention to the different kind of attention this place required. He went to check on Emma. She was asleep in the position she always slept in, on her side, facing the window, with the green stuffed rabbit she had named Gerald tucked under her chin. He stood in the doorway for the standard 30 seconds that had become his threshold. Long enough to confirm and register, not so long that he was looking for something wrong. He went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The grocery list was on the refrigerator, held by a magnet that said Chicago from a trip his late wife had taken before Emma was born, and which Emma had claimed for her bedroom wall at age 4 and which Marcus had retrieved from the floor of the hall closet to return to service 3 months after Sarah died because the refrigerator needed its magnet. The list was in Emma's handwriting, partly. The bottom 3 items were Emma's additions, identified by the crayon and by the quality of the letters, which were getting better every month: aples, apples, chocolate milk, and soca cleats with a question mark after it. The question mark, the work of a child who had been told she could ask but not demand. Marcus had been watching the soccer cleats situation for 6 weeks. Emma's current cleats were too small. She had said nothing about it directly, but he had noticed the way she pulled them off after practice with the specific relief of discomfort ending. New ones, at the size she needed now, ran between $60 and $90 at the sporting goods place, which was not an insurmountable sum but sat in the month's budget at the end of a row of other non-insurmountable sums that had a collective insurmountability. He took the wallet from his inspection bag and set it on the kitchen table. He made his tea and sat across from it. The $42,250 was in the main compartment of a wallet that had cost more than Emma's cleats and the rent combined. It was sitting on his kitchen table at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. No one had seen him pick it up except a surveillance camera he had noted, and which was, if it came to it, evidence of nothing except a man picking up a wallet and walking away with it. He looked at it. He thought about the cleats, the way you think about things you are specifically trying not to use as an argument. He thought about the 3 months of inspection contracts that had been slow, and the car's rear brakes, which needed doing, and the amount in Emma's school savings account, which he checked on the first of each month the way he checked structural stress calculations, carefully, and without the luxury of pretending the numbers said something they didn't. The wallet sat on the table. He drank his tea. Then he got up, took a piece of notepaper from the drawer beside the stove, and wrote down the main office number he had looked up in the car. He clipped it to the wallet with a binder clip from the same drawer. He set them both on the counter beside the kettle, where he would see them in the morning. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He did not count the money again. 12 years earlier, Marcus Hale had held a position with a title that required a business card with small print. He had been senior compliance engineer and then director of structural safety standards at Meridian Group, a regional engineering consultancy that had, during his 6 years there, grown its client base to include 4 of the 10 largest real estate development firms operating in the state. His specific domain was the intersection of building code compliance and long-cycle structural integrity, not whether a building met the requirements on the day it passed inspection, but whether it would continue meeting them over 20, 40, 60 years of use, under the load conditions and material fatigue patterns that actuarial engineers modeled and most developers preferred not to think about. He had developed a compliance model during his 4th year at Meridian that became, within 2 years of its internal adoption, the standard safety review framework for high-rise residential and mixed-use construction in the region. It specified inspection intervals, load testing protocols, and the specific redundancy requirements for critical structural systems that could not be recovered once they failed. It was a document that was functional rather than impressive, not the kind of work that appeared in trade publications or generated speaking invitations, but the kind that reduced the probability of structural failures in buildings where several hundred people lived. Vaughan Developments had licensed the framework through Meridian during the construction of their first tower, 4 years before Marcus left the company. It was now, in its 5th iteration, embedded in the compliance documentation for every Vaughan project that had broken ground in the last decade. His name appeared in the acknowledgement section of the original document, and nowhere in the 5 revisions that had followed, which was the standard trajectory of institutional knowledge. The work persisted, the attribution drifted. He had left Meridian in the year after Sarah's diagnosis. The illness was a long one, progressive, requiring the kind of sustained management that did not fit around a director-level position at a growing consultancy without cost. He had asked for accommodation. The firm had provided what it could and the rest had not been enough, and he had made the calculation that the cost of the mismatch was being borne in ways he could not allow, and he had resigned with the professionalism that was habitual to him and the grief that was not. He had taken consulting work. He had been Emma's primary caregiver through Sarah's final year, and then simply Emma's father, in the complete sense of the term, in the years that followed. The consulting work was steady if unspectacular. He audited buildings. He reviewed compliance documentation. He wrote inspection reports that were thorough and accurate, and that occasionally prevented buildings from doing things buildings were not supposed to do, and that generated no more recognition than a clean audit ever generates, which is none. He recognized the Vaughn Development's letterhead on the folded documents in the wallet before he had fully read the header. He recognized it the way you recognize the handwriting of a system you helped design, not consciously, as a matter of explicit identification, but with the specific familiarity of deeply internalized knowledge that surfaces as pattern recognition before it surfaces as thought. He unfolded the documents at his kitchen table on Friday morning, before Emma woke up, with his coffee on one side and the binder-clipped notepaper on the other. The documents were acquisition phase analysis for a commercial development, project code on the header, financial summary, structural compliance cost analysis in a column on the second page. The compliance cost column had a line item that he had to read twice. Tier 2 inspection protocol, reduction candidate. He looked at this for a long moment. He folded the documents back along their original creases and put them inside the wallet. He picked up his coffee and looked at the kitchen window, where the morning light was doing the ordinary thing it did at this hour, which was simply being present. Then he called the Vaughn Development's main number. He arrived at Vaughn Development's headquarters at 9:15 on Friday morning, which was when their reception desk was staffed but before the executive floor reached its full activity level. He had Emma's school bag in his car, where it had been since school drop-off 20 minutes earlier, and he was wearing the work clothes he wore on inspection days, clean but functional, with the Hale structural consulting embroidery on the chest pocket that he had added to his field jacket 3 years ago as a concession to the professional credibility argument. The lobby was the kind of lobby designed to communicate wealth through restraint: stone floors, high ceilings, a reception desk that was expensive in the way of objects that do not announce their costs. 2 security staff were positioned at the entry screening station. 3 people in tailored clothing were crossing the lobby in the direction of the elevators. Marcus went to the reception desk. He said he had a delivery for Victoria Vaughn's office, personal item, lost property. He said it in the straightforward way of a man who does not require the interaction to be anything other than what it is. He placed the wallet on the desk, still with the binder-clipped notepaper, and asked for a confirmation of receipt in writing or by email. The receptionist looked at the wallet. She picked up her phone. He waited in the specific way he waited at inspection sites when the access was being arranged, standing, not checking his phone, available but not pressing. After 4 minutes, a woman came from the corridor to the left of the desk, not Victoria Vaughn, but an assistant of the particular kind that senior executives employ, capable, composed, with the professional attention that assesses situations before it responds to them. "Mr. Hale?" "Yes." "Ms. Vaughn would like to speak with you personally. Can I ask you to come up? I have a site visit at 10:30, he said. I'm not able to stay. Is there an email address I can send the receipt request to?" The assistant looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has been asked an unexpected question by a person who doesn't appear to be doing what unexpected people usually do. "Of course," she said. She produced a card and wrote an email address on the back. He took it and confirmed the receipt verbally. Wallet returned, contents intact, no action required from the recipient, and asked her to pass the confirmation to Ms. Vaughn. She wanted to express her. "Not necessary," he said. "But thank you." He walked back across the lobby, through the screening station, and out the glass doors. He drove to his site visit. Upstairs, in the corner office on the 14th floor, Victoria Vaughn watched the lobby camera footage that her head of security had pulled at her request. She watched the man in the field jacket cross the lobby, decline the invitation upstairs, confirm the return, and leave. She watched it twice. She had spent the previous evening running the range of explanations: leverage play, delayed blackmail, public virtue signaling, set up for future pressure. She had worked through all of them and retained them all as possibilities, because the specific experience of having $42,000 returned without comment by a person who had had it in his possession overnight did not fit any of the narrative categories she had ready. She looked at the footage of him in the lobby again. Then she turned to her assistant. "Find out who he is," she said. "Everything." The assistant left. Victoria looked at the lobby footage once more, at the man walking calmly through the glass doors and into the morning, and said to no one in particular, "Follow him." The assistant, still within earshot, turned back. "I'll go myself," Victoria said. She had done this once before, followed someone herself, without staff, without the insulation of professional distance, after a vendor dispute 3 years ago that had resolved in a way that left her with questions she hadn't been able to pay people to answer. She had found what she expected that time, the expected person in the expected circumstances, which had resolved the questions and restored the ordinary calculus. This time she drove herself, in the car she kept for the days she wanted to be someone other than Victoria Vaughn, CO. A 5-year-old gray sedan, unremarkable, that she used for exactly this kind of occasion and for the rare Saturday when she wanted to go somewhere without being identified from the parking structure. She picked up his address from the property records her assistant had pulled before she left, a residential address in a district she drove through occasionally on the way to other places, the kind of neighborhood that real estate analysis classified as stable and affordable, which meant it had not yet been acquired by people like her. The house was a bungalow. White with dark green trim, a front porch with 2 chairs and a side table that held a coffee mug and a folded newspaper, a yard that was kept without being landscaped. She drove past it twice and parked on the adjacent street. She was there when Emma came home from school. The man, Marcus, her assistant's file said 44, structural safety consultant, licensed, 13 years of independent practice, arrived in a gray pickup truck that had seen enough use to have a story. He parked in the driveway. A small girl got out of the passenger side in a yellow raincoat with a backpack decorated in what appeared to be cartoon foxes. They walked to the porch together. He said something. She laughed. He unlocked the door, and she went in. He checked the mail from the box at the end of the path, bills, by the look of the envelopes, which she noted without judgment, and followed her in. Victoria stayed. She was not certain what she was waiting for. The range of things she could observe from a parked car on a residential street was limited. But she had the feeling, which she had learned to trust, that the most informative thing about a person was often visible in the transition between public and private, the moment when the performed self relaxed into the real one. At 4:15, a door opened 2 houses down, and an elderly man emerged with a cane and looked with an expression of resigned problem at the section of porch railing that had clearly been loose for some time. He tapped it. It moved in the way of things that are going to become worse before anyone addresses them. He went back inside. At 4:32, Marcus came out of the bungalow in different clothes, still work clothes, but the specific older set that people reserve for jobs they expect to make them dirty. He had a tool bag. He went to the elderly man's house and knocked. Victoria watched Marcus spend the next 40 minutes repairing the porch railing, the specific, methodical work of someone who understood load and joint and fastener in the practical way rather than the theoretical one. The elderly man came out at one point, and they talked. Marcus showed him something on the railing, a point of wear, and explained something that made the man nod and then nod again. When the repair was finished, Marcus gathered his tools and declined. She was too far away to hear, but the body language was specific, what appeared to be an offer of payment. He went back to the bungalow. At 8:40 p.m., a light came on in what she could see was a room at the back of the house. She moved the car to a position where the window was partially visible. Through it she could see the edge of a desk, a lamp, a man in reading glasses reviewing what appeared to be technical documents, the large format pages of structural drawings, recognizable by their format to anyone who had spent enough time in construction development. She was about to leave when she noticed the truck. She had walked past it on the way to her repositioned parking spot without paying it attention. Now she looked at it more closely, specifically at what was visible through the driver's window, a series of documents clipped to the visor above the driver's seat, the way contractors kept quick reference materials at hand. One of them, the bottom edge visible at the visor's lower clip, had a header she could read from 8 feet away. Vaughan Developments, Structural Compliance Review, Site 7. And above the header, handwritten in the margin in a small, careful hand, the letters MH in the corner where document authors initialed their work. She called her head of construction compliance from the car before she drove away. He answered on the third ring, which was fast for 8:50 p.m., which told her he had been expecting to hear from her about something. She asked him about Site 7. He described it, a mixed-use residential tower under final review, 18 months from completion, in the secondary approval phase that preceded final permit sign-off. She asked about the current inspection status. He told her it was an active audit. An outside structural consultant had been engaged 6 weeks ago for the Tier 2 inspection protocol review, which was the safety framework interval their compliance documentation required at this phase of construction. She asked who the consultant was. He told her. She said she would call him in the morning. She drove home. At 6:40 the next morning, she was in her home office with the Site 7 compliance file, which her assistant had sent electronically at 6:15 without question because Victoria's assistant had learned, over 4 years, that early morning requests were not the time to ask what they were for. The Tier 2 inspection protocol was a framework she had seen in compliance documentation for as long as she could remember. It was a standard part of the project cycle, the way building permits and title searches were standard, present in every file without requiring active attention. She had never read it closely. She read it closely now. The framework specified inspection intervals, load testing requirements, redundancy checks for critical structural systems, the specific verification steps that ensured a building's long-cycle performance matched its design performance rather than merely its day-one approval. It was dense technical documentation, the kind that existed in files precisely because it did not need to be actively managed by people who were not structural engineers. She found the cost analysis from the documents in her wallet. The line item was clear in the daylight of her own office and the context of the file she now had open. Tier 2 inspection protocol. Reduction candidate referred to a proposed simplification of the inspection schedule that would reduce the compliance review timeline by 6 weeks and the associated cost by approximately $80,000. The proposal had been approved at the construction management level 3 months ago. She had countersigned a package of project approvals that week. This line item had been one of 32 in the package. She found the current inspection report for Site 7 in the file. It was from Marcus Hale, dated 4 days ago, flagged for urgent review. The report was 8 pages. She read all 8. The language was technical and precise and required her to read 2 sections twice and 1 section 3 times before she was confident she understood what it was saying. What it was saying, stripped of the engineering specificity, was this: the structural steel in the tower's core load-bearing section showed early indicators of fatigue concentration at the joints, consistent with a fabrication variation in one of the steel batches used in the first 12 floors. Under normal loading conditions and with the full Tier 2 inspection intervals intact, this would be detected, documented, and addressed before it became a long-cycle risk. Under the simplified inspection schedule, the reduction candidate, the next scheduled inspection for this system would occur after the building was occupied. The report recommended immediate reinstatement of the full inspection protocol and a targeted inspection of the flag joint system within 30 days. The report had been submitted through the compliance intake system 4 days ago. It had not been escalated to her desk. She looked at the submission date and then at the deadline in the site schedule. Final permit review was in 9 days. She called her head of construction compliance again. This time he did not answer on the third ring. She went to the site. It was easier than arranging a meeting and faster than a phone chain, and after 2 days of reading the file and 3 conversations with people who were careful in the ways that people are careful when they understand that something has gone wrong and are managing the radius of that understanding, she wanted to talk to Marcus Hale directly, without intermediaries. He was at the site at 7:40 in the morning, which she had confirmed through the site check-in log her compliance coordinator had provided. She arrived at 7:50 in the work site visitor gear she kept in her car, hard hat, high-vis vest, the steel-toed boots she had purchased 4 years ago for site visits, and which Emma would have found amusing and Emma's father, she suspected, would simply find accurate. He was reviewing drawings with the site's structural engineer near the core section when she approached. She introduced herself. There was a brief silence of a specific kind, the silence of a person who knows who is standing in front of them, and is deciding how to manage the conversation, which was different from the silence of someone who doesn't know. "Ms. Vaughn," he said. He said it with the same even quality he had brought to the lobby interaction, which she now recognized as a consistent register rather than a situational one. This was simply how he spoke. "I read the inspection report," she said. The site engineer looked between them with the expression of someone who is weighing the organizational calculus of a conversation between a CEO and a contractor, and deciding to become extremely interested in the drawings. "I'll give you a few minutes," the engineer said, and moved away with the drawings. "The report is accurate," Marcus said. "The joint fatigue indicators are in the photography log, sections 4 through 6. The fabrication variation is documented in the batch records from the steel supplier." "I know," she said. "I read it." She looked at the core section, the visible portion of the structural steel, rising through the floor levels above them, carrying the load of what would eventually be 18 stories of residential and commercial occupancy. "The Tier 2 reduction was approved at project management level without coming to me," she said. He waited. "That doesn't fix it," she added. "But I want you to know the approval chain." "The approval chain is in the report," he said. "Appendix C." She had read Appendix C. He had documented the approval chain with the same specificity he applied to the structural data. She suspected he had done this not as accusation but as record, which was the difference between a report designed to assign blame and a report designed to produce correction. "I'd like to talk about the reinstatement of the full protocol," she said. "That's what needs to happen," he said. "Before the permit review. 30 days for the targeted joint inspection, then the full interval schedule going forward. What's the cost implication? $80,000 for the inspection work. Potentially more if the joint remediation requires structural reinforcement. I can't tell you the remediation number until the targeted inspection is complete." She looked at him. "You returned $42,000 to my office without keeping a cent." He looked at her evenly. "The money wasn't mine. Most people would have made a different calculation." He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, the quiet of someone considering whether to say something and deciding on the accurate version. "The calculation I make is, what would I be teaching my daughter if she knew I kept it? That's the only calculation that matters." She held this. "I'd like to arrange a reward through the company," she said. "The return of the wallet, the inspection report." "The inspection report is what you hired me for," he said. "That's the job. Doing the job doesn't require a reward." He paused. "What it requires is that the building gets fixed." She looked at the structural steel above them. "The building gets fixed," she said. He nodded once. "Then the inspection will confirm it." She put on her hard hat for the rest of the site visit, which was 2 more hours, and asked the right questions, which he answered completely, and by the time she left she had 3 pages of her own notes and a revised understanding of what the word risk meant in the specific context of structural engineering, which was, not the probability of the worst outcome, but the distance between what a building was and what it needed to be to remain what it was for the next 60 years. The press conference was not Victoria's first choice. Her first choice was a targeted institutional correction, reinstate the protocol, complete the inspection, move the building through its permit review on the corrected schedule. Clean, internal, auditable. The investors changed the calculation. 3 of Vaughn Development's institutional investors had received, through channels that Victoria's communications team spent 2 days trying to identify, a summary of the Site 7 compliance review, not the full report, but the executive summary, accurate and specific. The summary noted that a contracted inspector had identified a structural risk, filed a flagged report, and that the inspection protocol which would have identified the risk earlier had been reduced as a cost measure. The first investor call came on a Tuesday. The second was Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, her board chair had called. She made the decision herself. The press conference was at 11 a.m. on a Friday, in the Vaughan Development's conference room with the glass wall overlooking the development district, the specific room she used for announcements she wanted to own rather than manage. She had called Marcus on Thursday evening. She had told him what she was planning and asked whether he would attend. He had been quiet for a moment, and then said he would be there if Emma's school schedule permitted, which it did because Friday mornings were her late start. He came in the work jacket. She had considered whether to ask him to dress otherwise and had decided against it, because the work jacket was what the story was about and dressing him differently would be the wrong kind of management. She opened the press conference directly, without the performance of confidence that preceded difficult announcements. Vaughan Developments accepted and retained an inspection report from our contracted structural auditor that identified significant compliance risk in a current development project, she said. The report was accurate. It was flagged for urgent review. It was not escalated to my desk within the timeline the situation required. She paused. That is an institutional failure that I am responsible for, and I'm addressing it publicly because the alternative, a quiet correction, is not proportionate to the seriousness of what the report documented. She described the structural finding, the reinstatement of the full Tier 2 protocol, and the targeted joint inspection that had been completed the previous week and had confirmed the remediation pathway Marcus had outlined. The building would meet its permit review on a revised schedule. The occupancy timeline was delayed by 11 weeks. Then she talked about the wallet. She described it plainly, the loss, the return, the amount, the completeness of the return. She said that the man who had returned it had made no claim, sought no recognition, and had attempted to prevent the structural risk she was now publicly addressing before the risk had been corrected. She said that his name was Marcus Hale, and that he had been contracted to do a specific job, and that he had done it with the kind of thoroughness that produced a finding the company's internal process had failed to generate. She said that the original safety compliance framework embedded in every Vaughan development project had been developed, in its foundational version, by Marcus Hale. She said that the framework would now be reinstated to its full specification across all active projects, with the inspection protocol restored to the original interval schedule. She looked at the room. We build buildings that other people live in, she said. The discipline required to do that correctly is not a line item. It is the premise. Marcus was in the back third of the room, in the work jacket, standing in the specific posture of a man who is present for a thing without being the thing's performer. He did not look at the cameras when they turned toward him after Victoria said his name. He looked at the floor and then at the window and then at his hands. He had his phone in his pocket with Emma's school on speed dial, in case she needed to leave. He didn't need to leave. Victoria sent the check through her assistant the following Monday. It was a formal reward check, drawn on the company account, in an amount that her legal team had described as proportionate to the combined circumstance of the wallet return and the structural finding. She would not say the number at the press conference, and she would not say it here. The number was adequate and had been calculated honestly. Marcus received it on Tuesday. He looked at it for a long time at the kitchen table, with his morning coffee and Emma at school and the quiet of a weekday house around him. He put it in the envelope drawer. He called Victoria on Wednesday. He said he appreciated the company's intention and that he did not intend to cash the check. He said this without the quality of a man making a performance of virtue, in the direct, practical register of someone stating a decision. He said it the way he had said most things in their interactions, as a matter of record. Victoria was quiet for a moment. It's legitimate, she said. You earned it. I know, he said. I'd like to redirect it. He had thought about this since the press conference, which was where the thought had first taken clear shape. He had been looking at the room, the press, the investors, the executives, the technical staff in the rows near the back, and he had been thinking about the specific gap between the kind of structural knowledge he carried and the number of people who would need that knowledge in the next 20 years to do the work that buildings required. He had been thinking about the neighborhood where he grew up, which had buildings that were old and buildings that had been built quickly and buildings that were maintained by whoever was available rather than whoever was trained, and about the number of structural failures in underserved construction environments that were not dramatic collapses but slow, expensive, dangerous deteriorations that nobody had been taught to see. He proposed a structural safety training program. Not a scholarship, a practical program, weekend workshops, field instruction, inspection methodology for workers, junior contractors, and community facilities managers in neighborhoods where professional inspection was too expensive to access consistently. He described what it would require to run the first cohort, and what a 2-year commitment would produce in terms of trained capacity. Victoria was quiet for the length of time it took to write something down. "How much is the check?" she asked. "More than the program costs," he said. "Then the remainder goes into a fund for the second cohort," she said. "That works," he said. He retrieved the check from the envelope drawer and looked at it again. "The program needs a name," Victoria said. "I'll think about it," he said. He knew what the name would be. He hadn't decided it consciously, but he knew it the way he knew structural things, from the inside out, from the architecture of what it was for. It would be named for Sarah, who had asked better questions about why buildings fell down than most engineers he had worked with, because she had grown up in a building that had not been maintained correctly, and she had understood at a practical level what that meant in a way that professional training sometimes failed to convey. He didn't say this to Victoria yet. He said he would send her a program outline by the end of the week. He put the check back in the envelope drawer. He went to work. He was home before Emma's school bus that afternoon. This was unusual. His schedule rarely allowed it, and he registered it as a small gift, the kind that ordinary days occasionally produce without announcement. He made lemonade, because Emma had been asking about lemonade for 2 weeks in the mild, persistent way she asked for things she wanted but had decided not to press for, and he had not made it because the lemonade situation had always been just behind the other situations in the queue. He made it and put it in the refrigerator. She came through the door at 3:22 with the energy she brought to arrivals, backpack dropping, shoes coming off, the immediate need to communicate several things simultaneously. He listened to all of them. There was a school situation involving a disagreement about the rules of a game. There was a math test. There was something Gerald the rabbit had allegedly done overnight. He listened to all of it at the kitchen table with his lemonade. When the initial velocity of the afternoon had settled, Emma reached into her backpack and produced a folded piece of paper with the care she brought to objects she was about to present, both hands deliberate. "I made this at art today," she said. "It's yours." He unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing, the sky in the confident blue that Emma favored, the ground in green, and rising from the ground a building, tall, straight, with many windows rendered in the patient sequential way of a child who had decided that buildings had windows and that all of them deserved to be drawn. At the base of the building, 2 figures. The smaller one had a yellow raincoat. The taller one had a hard hat. Below the drawing, in the careful handwriting that had improved significantly this year, "Daddy's building that doesn't fall." He looked at it. He looked at it the way he had looked at Lily's drawing in the briefcase, with the full attention that certain objects produced when they arrived at the moment that made them more than what they were made of. "I like it very much," he said. She looked satisfied and went to find Gerald. He got up and went to the small desk in the alcove off the kitchen, where he kept the working files for his current projects, the Site 7 documents, the permit review correspondence, the structural assessment forms. In the wide, flat drawer at the bottom of the desk, the one that was too large for regular files and had become, over the years, a repository for the things that deserved to be kept without needing to be accessed, he placed the drawing. He placed it beside the original compliance framework document from his Meridian years, the foundational version, printed on the large format paper he had used then, now folded to fit the drawer, with the original annotations in the margins in the handwriting he recognized as his own from a different period of his life. The two documents sat in the drawer together. He pushed it closed. He went back to the kitchen, where Emma had reappeared with Gerald and a proposal about the lemonade. He poured 2 glasses. Outside, in the ordinary afternoon, the city conducted its business, buildings standing in the positions they had been built to stand in, carrying the loads they had been designed to carry, holding because someone had done the unglamorous work of making sure they would. Most of that work was invisible. Most of the people who did it were unknown to the people the work protected. Marcus drank his lemonade. He watched Emma explain Gerald's position on the matter. He listened.